Good evening, and welcome to Sleepless Horror. Maybe tonight you're curled beneath a heavy blanket, or listening from a quiet corner of the room where the lamp hums softly beside you. Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here. Let the noise of the day fade behind you now. Let your breath grow slower. Let your thoughts grow soft. Before we begin, I have two small questions for you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? I always find it oddly comforting how these stories echo through so many places at once. Drifting through island bedrooms wrapped in mist, or across midnight train rides through dark hills, or whispered into a phone tucked beneath a pillow. Tonight's story begins not with fear, but with curiosity. And like most things in life, it starts in an attic. He hadn't meant to find the map. The day had been cold, clouded over with a fine chalk gray sky, and the traveler, he never gave his name, had taken shelter in a second-hand bookshop on a crooked lane, the kind that creaked with every footstep and smelled of dust and old secrets. The upstairs attic was half storage, half forgotten reading room, warmed only by a flickering gas stove in the corner. And there, tucked between a folded wool coat and a cracked leather valise, he'd found the map. It wasn't a full map. Just a torn square of yellowed paper tucked inside the back cover of a fading travel journal. The ink had bled in places. Hills were sketched with feathered pen strokes. There were rivers that no longer had names. And then there it was, a tiny dot, no roads leading to it, no border around it. Just a single word, written in narrow, delicate script. Wheaton Hollow. He didn't know why it pulled at him, but it did. He turned the page back, then forward again, as if it might vanish when he looked away. But it was still there. The name felt strange in his mouth. It wasn't on any modern map, not on the phone he kept in his coat pocket, not in the index of the travel guide he later searched by candlelight. Still, it felt like a place that had been real, a place that maybe still was, just forgotten or hidden. By the end of the week, he had made a decision. He bought a rail pass, packed his bag with notebooks, his soft wool coat, a tin of loose-leaf tea, and the compass that had belonged to his grandfather. No one asked where he was going. He left no note. And in the evening train that followed the edge of the valley, the map tucked inside his journal, he began his journey toward the place that shouldn't exist. Wheaton Hollow, a village that may have never been, but one that seemed to be waiting for him anyway. The train moved slower as the hills began to rise. Outside the window, fields gave way to thick woods and silent marshland, silvered by mist. The trees leaned toward the tracks as if listening, their bare branches etching the sky like old ink. The other passengers had already gone, one by one, at smaller stations along the line. Now it was only him, and the gentle rhythm of the rails beneath his feet. A bell chimed softly overhead. One more stop. The conductor, a man with salt and pepper whiskers and kind, tired eyes, paused by his seat as the train began to break. "End of the line," he murmured, almost apologetically. The traveler nodded. The station had no name, just a weathered wooden platform shrouded in fog, with a single gas light burning above a cracked timetable. The moment he stepped off the train, the air changed. Cooler, quieter. as if even the birds had forgotten to sing here. The train pulled away without ceremony, the red glow of its rear light fading into the trees. Then silence, deep and full. He adjusted the strap of his bag, then unfolded the map. According to its hand-drawn markings, Wheaton Hollow should have been less than 4 miles west, past the ridgeline and through a wooded bend. But there were no signs, no roads, just the faded silhouette of a path beyond the station. He followed it. Gravel turned to packed earth. Earth softened into moss. A tangle of brambles pressed in on either side, then gave way to fields, and in the center of the field, far off, almost too distant to see, stood a chimney. Alone, no roof, no walls, just the brick spire, straight as a finger, reaching skyward from the soil. The traveler stopped. Something in him stirred. Not fear, not yet, but a strange stillness, as though the world had taken a breath and hadn't let it out. He glanced behind him. The train station was gone from sight. Only the fog remained, and the long hush of the countryside, where the path he walked hadn't been walked in years. He took one more step forward. It took nearly an hour to reach it. The field was vast, wild and yellowing at the edges, with knee-high grasses that whispered against his legs as he moved. The chimney stood in the center like a forgotten monument. No foundation, no stones, just brick rising from the earth, weathered with time as though it had grown there on its own. Up close, it was stranger still. The mortar was crumbling, yes, but the soot inside was fresh. He ran a hand along the brick and pulled back with blackened fingers. He looked around. Nothing but wind. No sound but the quiet hiss of grass moving in waves. Something about it unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Not wrong exactly, but unfinished. As if the house it had once belonged to had been removed piece by piece until only this spine remained. He opened his journal, the one he'd carried for years, and knelt beside a tuft of dry wildflowers to sketch it. The proportions, the strange pattern of moss along one side, the hollow square where a hearth had once lived. He made notes. No base, bricks warm, no birds, no insects, no smell of ash, only smoke. Then he closed the book and sat for a while. The sun was already slipping westward, casting long amber shadows across the hills. When the wind shifted, he heard it. A bell. Just once. Not far, but not near either. The kind of sound that rings from memory. Not metal. And then it was gone. He waited, held his breath, listened for voices, for footsteps. Nothing, and yet he didn't feel alone. That night he pitched his tent at the edge of the field, just beneath the rise of a tree-covered slope. The chimney stood in the dark, silhouetted against a moonless sky. He lit a small candle inside the canvas and lay back with his coat tucked under his head, journal resting on his chest. From somewhere deep in the hills, the bell rang again. Once, then silence, and slowly, sleep. He woke just before dawn. The world outside his tent was washed in soft blue light, the kind that only exists in the in-between. Not quite night, not quite morning. A chill clung to the air. The chimney still stood, silent and cold. But it wasn't what woke him. It was the scent, not smoke this time. Apples, old apples, bruised and overripe, the sweet, almost sour perfume of forgotten fruit hanging thick in the wind. He followed it, down a narrow slope, past twisted undergrowth, into a tangle of trees he hadn't seen the day before. Branches arched overhead in crooked shapes. Their limbs were heavy with leaves, though none should have still been green this time of year. And then he saw it, an orchard. Not neat rows, but a wild, unkempt sprawl. The kind of orchard that had once been loved, but hadn't felt hands in decades. And in its center, flickering softly beneath the crooked arms of an old pear tree, a candle burned inside a glass lantern. It wasn't rusted, it wasn't broken, it was lit. He paused a good distance away, unsure if someone else might be near. But the orchard was silent. The candle flame didn't move. No footsteps, no breeze, just that faint glow. He circled slowly through the trees, watching the light from different angles. Each time he thought it might be a trick of morning haze, it reasserted itself, steady and small, tucked in the grass. He finally approached. The lantern sat atop a stone, half buried in moss. There were faint carvings along the side, a line of initials too worn to read. Beneath the lantern was a folded scrap of linen, damp at the corners. He crouched. There were no footprints, no cigarette butts, no food wrappers. Whoever lit it had left no sign of being there at all. He reached for the lantern's handle. Warm, not hot, just warm, as though it had been placed there not long ago. Maybe an hour, maybe less. He didn't touch the flame. Instead, he sat down beside it and pulled out his journal, sketching the shape of the tree, the pattern of the bark, the way the flame curled in on itself inside the glass. He didn't feel watched, but he didn't feel alone either. After some time, the wind picked up, brushing leaves across the moss. The flame didn't flicker. He left it burning and stepped back into the orchard. The scent of apples followed him all the way to the edge of the trees, and faded the moment he crossed into the field again. The morning passed in stillness. He wandered the edge of the orchard, noting how quickly the trees gave way to tall grass. There was no fence, no stone wall, no boundary where one might expect it. Just forest, and then not. As he walked, his boots pressed through brittle leaves and soft moss. He kept the journal in one hand, noting every shift in terrain, every clearing or marker, but the land gave up little. Around noon, clouds rolled in, low and slow, casting the hills in a soft silver hue. He climbed a rise to get a better view and spotted something strange tucked among the trees below. A gate, just a gate. It stood on its own. Rusted iron held between two stone posts, one of which leaned awkwardly to the side. There was no path leading to it, no fence attached, just the frame, standing in the underbrush, as if marking the entrance to nothing at all. He made his way down carefully, keeping his coat close as the wind picked up. When he reached it, he noticed the iron had curled at the top into delicate spirals, like ivy tendrils frozen in place. One hinge was broken, causing the gate to hang slightly ajar, and as he stepped closer, a voice, soft, just behind his left shoulder. "You're not from here, are you?" He turned. No one. The orchard was silent, the trees still. Even the birds had gone quiet. He scanned the branches, the grass, the rocks. No movement, but the voice had been real. Not imagined, not memory. It hadn't sounded threatening. Just curious. He stepped toward the gate. The metal creaked faintly in the breeze. A faint scent lingered in the air. Not apples this time, but something sharper, like sage or smoke. He passed through. There was no change, no shift in pressure or light. No footsteps followed. But something did change. He just couldn't say what. The woods beyond the gate felt heavier, thicker, as if they had been waiting. And in the center of the grove ahead, a new trail was forming in the leaves, faint and winding and leading westward. He didn't remember seeing it before. Still, he followed. That night, something shifted. He'd returned to the field before dark, notebook pages filled with quiet observations. The orchard's curve, the strange gate, the voice that hadn't returned. As the sun melted into the hills, the world hushed. He sat cross-legged near the base of a tree, eating from a small tin of preserved fruit and listening to the distant wind. Then he saw it. A path. It hadn't been there moments ago. Where grass had stretched in an unbroken wave, now a narrow line cut through it, not worn like a road, but outlined as if the land had remembered something long buried. It glowed slightly in the twilight, not with light, but with presence. He stood slowly. The path curved gently westward, dipping between a pair of low hills and disappearing into mist. He took a step onto it. The grass beneath his boots flattened softly, like breath releasing. There were no tracks, no prints, no sign of wheels or hooves or even time. Just a feeling, like the trail wanted to be followed. He continued for nearly an hour. The sky above deepened from violet to charcoal, stars blinking into view like small forgotten fires. And just as the path seemed about to open into something larger, it ended. No fence, no wall. Just a sudden return to wild grass and silence, as if it had never existed at all. He turned to look back, but the path was gone behind him too, erased or hidden. The fog had begun to roll in again, thin at first, then thicker, swallowing the trees in soft breath. He lit a lantern, its amber light barely holding the dark at bay, and found a place to sit beneath a ridge where the earth had folded into a small hollow. There, he opened his journal and drew from memory the shape of the trail, the feeling of being led, and he wrote a single sentence at the bottom of the page. Some places only reveal themselves when the sky forgets the sun. As he closed the book and drifted off, the wind whispered faintly across the grass, and for a moment it sounded like footsteps. The fog didn't lift until mid-morning. When it did, the land felt changed again, familiar but gently rearranged, as though something had walked through it overnight, brushing the grass in new directions. He packed slowly, tucking the journal into his coat and relighting the small lantern that had flickered beside him since dusk. Its glow was faint in the daylight, but he kept it with him. It felt grounding. By midday, the clouds had thinned enough for pale sunlight to break through, casting long shadows across the rise of the hills. That's when he saw it, half buried in the mud just beyond the tree line, a weather vane. At first glance, it looked like scrap, a bent metal arrow, twisted and flecked with rust. But as he stepped closer, he realized it was old, hand-forged, not machine-cut, its surface pocked with time and lichen. The directional arms had long since broken away, but the main spindle still turned. Even in the still air, it turned. Slowly, softly, as though moved by memory rather than wind. He knelt beside it, brushing away the soil with careful fingers. On the central plate, beneath layers of grime, a faint inscription appeared, barely legible, but just enough to read E&C 1889. He didn't know the initials, but they felt close, not just names, but traces. He opened his journal again, sketched the outline of the vein, the position of the arms, and noted the strange absence of wind. Then he waited. And sure enough, even as the trees stood motionless, even as the leaves didn't stir, the vein turned again, due north. Something about it made his breath catch. Not fear exactly, but anticipation, as though it were pointing not to direction, but to event. He followed the line it traced across the field until he reached a patch of flattened grass, ringed with small stones. They were almost perfectly spaced, forming a loose spiral. At its center, nothing. No tree, no marker, just the impression of something that had once been there and then wasn't. He lingered until the sky turned orange, then made his way back toward camp. That night, as he lit his lantern again and watched the shadows return, the weather vane's arrow turned once more, and this time it pointed behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing, just the orchard in the distance, and the soft, growing sense that he was no longer the only one following the path. The morning began with tea and silence. He'd boiled water over the small burner tucked into his rucksack and watched the steam drift up toward a sky still streaked with early mist. Around him, the landscape had settled into that hush only found after fog, like the land itself was holding its breath. He unwrapped his journal carefully, as he did every morning, but something was wrong. A page was missing, not torn, not violently removed, but gone, as if it had never existed. Right between the chimney sketch and the orchard. His hands stilled. He flipped back and forth through the spine, checking each edge, checking the margins, checking to see if perhaps the page had curled or folded into another. But no, it was simply gone. The paper was bound tight, thread-stitched. Nothing should have slipped out unnoticed. He remembered writing on that page, remembered drawing the grove from a high hill, the way the lantern flame reflected in the glass. But now the memory was fuzzy, as if dulled around the edges. He checked his pack. Nothing. No loose sheets, no signs of weather damage. And then, at the bottom of the journal's back pocket, a slip of linen, folded neatly, damp at the corners. It hadn't been there the night before. He unfolded it carefully. One small blot of ink in the center, a mark, not a word, not a letter, just a faint loop, like the start of a signature or a symbol, unfinished. He held it to the light. The scent of apples lingered faintly on the cloth. Bruised, software, almost sour. He placed it beside the page gap and stared for a long time. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang once. Faint, muffled. He looked up and saw movement at the edge of the ridge. A figure, too far to see clearly, but standing very still, facing him. Then it turned and walked back into the trees. He rose without speaking, journal in hand, linen folded and pocketed, and quietly he followed. Not running, just walking. Because deep down, he understood something now. He wasn't documenting the mystery. He was part of it. The path the figure had taken wasn't really a path at all, just a subtle parting of tall grass, a faint darkening in the soil where boots might have passed. But he followed it anyway, not because he was sure, but because something deeper inside was. The trees thickened, light fell through in soft streaks, and the silence took on shape. After a time he saw it, a tree, old, wide, bark like river stone, with a single nail pressed into its side, and pinned beneath it a page. He approached carefully, the forest unusually still, as if holding the moment open just long enough for him to witness it. The paper was yellowed at the edges, brittle but intact. It had been folded once, then unfolded and smoothed by hand. He reached up and peeled it free. There was handwriting, narrow and careful, written in black ink. If you've found this place, it means the hollow has let you in, but it won't let you stay unless you choose to remember. Not just the land, not just the stories, but what you were before you forgot us. There are rules here. 1. Never walk the orchard past moonrise. 2. Never speak a name aloud. 3. If you hear the bell, wait. No name, no signature. Just a final line. We'll meet again when the sky folds twice. He read it 3 times, then slowly lowered the page and tucked it into his journal. The tree creaked above him, not from wind, but as though it exhaled. He stepped back, looked up. The nail was still there, but the paper in his hand now felt warm, not like something found, like something delivered. He stayed by the tree until the light shifted behind the branches, then turned. The way back was harder to see, but he didn't feel lost. And from far off, across the grass and through the edge of orchard trees, the bell rang again. Once, twice, then stillness. It appeared near dusk. He hadn't seen it on the hill that morning. But now, as the sun sank low and the trees cast long shadows over the ridge, there it was. A house, just beyond the orchard, where the path had vanished days before, tucked between 2 trees that leaned toward one another like whispering shoulders. It wasn't grand. 2 stories, wood siding, shuttered windows, but something about it made him stop. Not the architecture, not the silence, but the absence. There were no reflections. The windows, though dusty and still, showed no trees, no sky, no golden light glinting from behind him. Just panes of black glass, as if the world beyond them had been erased. He circled the house slowly, the lantern in his hand throwing pale light across the siding. The front door was slightly open, no creak, no wind. Inside it was cooler, a stillness held between walls that had long since forgotten noise. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, but there were no footprints, no animal nests, no signs of decay. Just a chair, facing a cold fireplace, and above the mantel, a mirror. He stepped closer, raised the lantern, looked into it, but again, no reflection. Not of himself, not of the room, only blackness, and beneath the mirror, carved into the wood, what does not reflect, remembers. He whispered the words aloud. The mirror stayed dark. He turned away. In the far corner of the room, a narrow table stood against the wall. Upon it, an open book. Its pages were yellowed, but the ink was fresh, still wet in places. He read the entry. Day 47. He's close now. I can feel it. The house is listening again. If he makes it to the bell tower, everything changes. He blinked. The handwriting looked familiar. He glanced toward the page's edge, where a small drawing curled around the corner. A spiral, delicate and looping. The same spiral he'd seen on the linen scrap in his journal. His hands trembled slightly. He closed the book and backed out into the hallway. At the top of the stairs, a figure stood for just a moment. Tall, still, head tilted slightly. Then it vanished. He didn't run, didn't speak. He simply lit the lantern again and whispered, I remember you. The house faded behind him. By morning, it was gone. He woke on a small patch of moss beneath an ash tree, lantern beside him still faintly glowing. But no house, no doorway, no mirror, only the outline of a foundation in the dirt. Dry earth, pressed flat by time with a scattering of stones shaped like corners. He walked the perimeter. No footprints, no signs of dream or memory. But where the fireplace had been, something new, the glint of brass. He knelt, brushing away soft layers of soil with the back of his hand. A piece of metal emerged, round, tarnished, cool to the touch. Not buried deep, not old. It was the face of a clock. Not attached to anything. No hands, no casing. Just the brass disc, half sunken in the ground. Numbers etched in perfect silence. 1 through 12. But where the hands should have met, a hollow space remained. Carved, not broken. He reached into his satchel, retrieved the journal, and made a quiet sketch. As he drew, he noticed something else. The numbers weren't quite right. At first glance, they looked normal, Roman numerals, evenly spaced. But on closer inspection, the IV had been replaced by 3, and the tutut was upside down. Not errors, intentions. He stared at it for a long time, then stood. And from across the field, he heard something ticking, not loudly, not near, just a slow, metronomic pulse, soft as a heartbeat beneath stone. He followed it. The sound led him to the edge of the orchard again, where a fallen fence lay in pieces beneath an old maple. There, nailed to the lowest rail, was a small wooden plaque, burned into its surface. Every place keeps its own time. The ticking stopped. He waited, heart quiet. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, a sound. Not ticking, not bells. Chimes, faint, off-key. like glass caught in a gentle breeze. He turned toward the sound, lantern in hand, and stepped beyond the fallen fence. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't sure if he was walking forward or back into something that had been waiting. The sound of the chimes faded, but never fully disappeared. They lingered in the spaces between the trees, not constant, but drifting. A few notes, then silence, then again. He followed it deep into the forest, where the light began to dim beneath the canopy. And that's when he found it. A hill, small, rounded, covered in ivy and bramble. Nothing remarkable at first glance. But near the base, partially hidden beneath tangled roots, was a door. Wooden, narrow, no handle. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years, but the ground in front of it was clear. No overgrowth, no leaves, no decay. He knelt. The roots arched over the door like fingers, gently curled. And in the center, just above where the keyhole might have been, a symbol had been carved. A spiral, the same as the one in the journal, the same as the linen scrap. He pressed his palm to it. The wood gave way, silently. The door opened inward without sound, revealing a steep staircase carved from stone, leading downward into darkness. He hesitated, then lit the lantern. The stairs were dry, smooth, worn in the middle from old footsteps. He descended. The air was still, thick with dust and a faint scent of wax and ash. As he reached the bottom, the space opened into a room. It wasn't a cellar, it wasn't a cave, it was prepared. Stone walls, wooden beams, a small table at the center with a candle, long melted, wick untouched. On the floor beside it, a circle of chalk, smudged but still visible. And on the far wall, a series of mirrors, 6 of them, each one mismatched. Some framed in ornate wood, others chipped and bare. But none reflected anything, just like the mirror in the house. He approached. In the center mirror, faint lines had been drawn in dust, the outline of a village. Tiny rooftops, a steeple, a square, and beneath it, a name. Larton Hollow. He whispered it aloud, and the candle on the table flickered to life. No spark, no sound, just flame. The mirrors stayed dark. He stepped back. Behind him, on the wall by the stairs, was a single word carved into the stone. Remember. He emerged from the root cellar before dawn. The forest was blue and still, the world hushed beneath a sleeping sky. Above him, the trees stirred just once, a passing wind with no source, no follow-through, as if something unseen had taken notice. He didn't speak. The spiral was still pressed into his memory, and the map drawn in dust. Larton Hollow. A place that didn't appear on any of his own maps, not even the oldest surveys he'd studied before this journey. He walked for hours, letting instinct lead now more than compass. Eventually, the trees opened into a clearing, and there it stood. A well. Ancient, circular, stone. It rose barely waist-high, covered in moss. No roof, no pulley, no rope, just an opening, wide and black. He approached slowly, lantern in hand. The air grew colder as he neared. Not freezing, but still, as if the well wasn't just deep, but watching. He knelt beside it and peered in. There was water far below, barely visible, and floating upon its surface, something metal. He angled the lantern over the edge. A key, long, old-fashioned, brass or bronze, dulled by time but unmistakably real. It drifted gently in the center of the well, tethered by nothing, not sinking, not moving, just waiting. He looked around the clearing. There were no ropes nearby, no buckets, but at the base of the well, tucked between two stones, a hook. He reached into his pack, pulled the coil of twine he used for marking trees, and tied it into a loop. With steady hands, he fashioned a line and lowered it. The key didn't resist. It floated up easily, light as breath, and settled into his hand the moment he pulled it over the edge. It was warm, no rust, no dirt, just a soft, worn smoothness, as if it had been held often, but not in years. There were symbols on the handle. One he recognized, the spiral, and another, the letter C. He stood, key in hand, and turned to look at the tree line. A path had opened there now, where none had been before. Faint, winding, softly marked by scattered leaves and broken twigs. The lantern flickered once. The wind stirred, and without a word, he followed the path. The key clutched gently in his coat pocket. The path led him further than expected. By the time the trees thinned, the sky had shifted to that strange in-between shade, not quite day, not yet dusk. The kind of light that makes even familiar shapes feel slightly off. And then he saw it, a bell tower, tall, narrow, stone and wood interwoven like roots and time. It stood alone at the edge of a clearing, no church attached, no walls or congregation, just the tower itself, leaning ever so slightly, as if it had grown weary of standing. At the top, the bell, large, blackened, motionless. There were no ropes, no clapper that he could see, just the heavy frame of iron and the open mouth of silence. He stepped closer. The wood of the stair creaked beneath his boots as he entered the base of the tower. Inside, everything smelled of old smoke and damp leaves. A spiral staircase rose into shadow. He climbed. Each step was worn at the center, smoothed by centuries or something else. And at the top, just beneath the bell, he found a small room. It held only one thing, a journal, bound in red cloth, laid carefully on a wooden stand. He opened it. The pages inside were covered in writing, but the handwriting was his. Every entry, every sketch, every note he had made in his own journal, perfectly copied. But none of the pages were torn. None were missing. And then, entries that hadn't happened yet. Chapter 15, The Return to the Orchard. Chapter 16, The Voice in the Window. Chapter 17, The Boat That Was Never Tied. He turned the pages slowly. Toward the back, one final note in a different hand. When the bell rings, the hollow will remember itself. He closed the book, stepped to the railing. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, but now, from this height, he saw something else. A flicker of movement at the base of the trees. Figures, not close, not detailed, but walking, not toward him, not away, just returning. He stood in silence, lantern held loosely in one hand, and then, though no rope moved, no wind stirred, no hand pulled, the bell above him rang. Once, clear, low, final, and when he looked down at his own journal, the ink was still wet. He didn't remember descending the stairs, but he found himself once again beneath the tower, standing in the soft moss at its base, the bell's echo still fading into the branches. The lantern glowed steady in his hand, and the red journal was gone. Only his own remained, tucked inside his coat. He walked slowly. No need to rush. The path was clearer now, not wider but welcoming, like the hollow had finally decided to stop hiding. The orchard appeared around a bend, not sudden, just there. The trees were still, bare now, their limbs tangled like reaching arms. The fruit was gone, the baskets too. Only fallen leaves carpeted the ground, soft and rustling beneath his boots. He stepped between the trees. The air here smelled different. Less of autumn, more of memory. Sweet and cool, with a hint of rain that hadn't fallen yet. He passed the place where he'd first seen the lantern light between the branches, and stopped. There, where the trees formed a quiet ring, stood a wooden table. Low, rough-hewn, empty, but at the center, a single apple. Red, glossy, perfect. He didn't touch it. He simply sat on the nearby stone and listened to the rustle of branches, the hush of breath, the faintest sound of something deeper, something just beneath the ground. He opened his journal and began to write. Not notes, not sketches, just thoughts, feelings, things he hadn't realized he'd carried with him, the names he'd forgotten, the way the wind sounded the first night he arrived, the feeling of being watched but never threatened. And as he wrote, a light appeared in the distance, software flickering, moving slowly through the trees, lantern light, another figure. They didn't speak, didn't wave, just stood at the edge of the orchard and watched. He closed the journal gently, stood and nodded once, not to the figure, but to the place itself. He understood now. The hollow didn't need to trap anyone. It just waited. Waited for someone to listen, to remember, to return. And as he turned to leave, the apple on the table split open. Not from rot, not from decay, but from within. And inside, folded into its core, was a scrap of cloth, with his initials stitched in faded thread. The forest dimmed as he walked. Not darker, not exactly. Just quieter, like something had shifted in the trees, like they were listening. He kept the cloth with his initials folded in his pocket, though he hadn't looked at it again. Some things, he'd learned, were better left unopened, for now. The path curved gently through the trees, and after some time he reached a clearing he didn't recognize. At its center stood a cottage, small, faded blue shutters, ivy up the side, roof slightly tilted like it had bowed to time but hadn't broken. It wasn't strange that it was there. What struck him was the light in the window, a soft golden glow, and behind it, a silhouette. Someone watching. He paused at the edge of the clearing, then stepped forward, slow and calm, letting the forest remain behind him. The cottage door was slightly ajar, not open, not closed. Inside, warmth. A table, a single chair, a coat hung near the door that looked very much like his own, older, dustier, but familiar, and on the windowsill, a cup of tea. Still steaming, he didn't see anyone. But he heard it. A voice, not loud, not frightening, soft, and somehow close, though no one stood near. It whispered his name, only once. He turned, slowly, and saw that the window now held a different view. Not the clearing, not the trees, but a village. A faint mist rolled between rooftops. Lanterns burned on empty porches. Wind stirred curtains in unseen homes. The bell tower rose in the distance, standing tall at the heart of it all. He leaned closer. The village in the window was moving. A woman walked across a narrow bridge, her coat trailing behind her. A dog slept beneath a bench near the square. Someone hung white sheets from a line near the orchard. He watched, and suddenly recognized the steeple, the angle of the hill, the curved chimney. It was Larton Hollow, before it vanished, whole, breathing, alive. And in the far corner of the image, another version of himself, sitting quietly on a bench, writing. He blinked, and the window was a window again. Outside, only trees, no voice, no glow, just silence. He stepped away from the glass and turned back to the room. The tea was still warm, and on the table now, a small silver key. He left the cottage without taking the key, not because he didn't trust it, but because it was already his. The air outside had shifted again, cooler now, touched by the first hints of evening mist. Not quite fog, but close. The kind of quiet that settles around your shoulders like a shawl. He walked slowly, past the trees that had bent toward the path as if they had grown that way for him alone. Eventually, he came to water. A narrow lake, one he hadn't seen before, stretched out between the trees, perfectly still. No breeze touched it. No insects broke its surface. It looked like glass, like memory waiting to be disturbed. At the edge of the lake, a boat. Old, wooden, green paint peeling at the sides, and floating, not tied to anything. No anchor, but it hadn't drifted, hadn't moved at all. It simply waited. He stepped closer. A small wooden plank connected the shore to the boat's edge, not built, just laid down, as if someone had placed it there minutes before. He checked the ground. No footprints, only his. The boat creaked gently as he stepped inside, and the moment his foot touched the floorboards, the mist thickened. Not white, not heavy, just pale gray, rolling in from the far side of the lake like breath. He didn't row. There were no oars. But the boat began to move anyway. Slow, deliberate, quiet. He sat down in the center, lantern by his side. And as the shoreline slipped away, the world folded inward, like the lake was not a lake at all, but a passage. The mist curled around the edges of the boat, soft and slow. And then, without a sound, he saw them. Figures, standing on the shore he'd left behind. Dozens, still and distant. Not waving, not calling, just watching. And one of them wore his coat. The boat carried him forward. No shore ahead. No wind. Only water, mist, memory, and the quiet certainty that wherever he was going, he'd been there before. The mist didn't lift, even as the boat slowed, even as the air thickened into silence. He could feel it pressing in, soft as breath against the skin. But it wasn't cold. It was familiar. The boat stopped. No bump, no tether. Just a quiet pause, as if it had reached something unseen. He stood. The water around him was impossibly still. He should have heard the creak of wood, the shift of wake, but instead, he heard whispers, not words, not voices, just the hush of something old, beneath, beneath, beneath. He looked down. The surface of the lake, once mirrored and calm, had changed. Now it shimmered, and then, like a curtain parting, it opened. Not physically, but perceptually. And below the boat, far beneath the water, he saw it. A house, perfectly intact, sunken but untouched. Its windows glowed softly with golden light, as though a hearth still burned inside. Its chimney curled smoke into water that didn't move. The same house from before, the one that had vanished near the orchard. Now below him, waiting. He knelt at the boat's edge and stared deeper. And in the topmost window, just beneath the surface, something moved. A figure, standing still, facing outward. Hand pressed to the glass, not beckoning, just present, watching. And then, a sound, software, gentle, from inside the house beneath the lake. A music box, turning slowly, playing notes too slow to dance to, but too lovely to forget. He reached for the lantern, held it over the water. Its light sank, deeper than it should have. And suddenly, the figure behind the glass was gone. Not vanished, moved. He stood again, and this time, the boat began to shift, but downward. Not sinking, descending, as though the water had turned to air. He closed his eyes, took one soft breath, and the lake enveloped him. He didn't feel the water. There was no cold, no pressure, only weightlessness, like falling without motion. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the boat. He stood on cobblestone. Mist drifted low around his boots, curling softly over the stones. The air smelled of old wood, chimney smoke, and something floral, lavender or rose, faint as a passing dream. He knew this place, Larton Hollow. Not forgotten, not broken, alive. Shutters clicked gently in the breeze. Lamps flickered behind lace curtains. A slow bell chimed once in the distance, though the tower itself was hidden behind a curve in the road. He walked forward. No one passed him. No voices called. But the sense of life was everywhere. Clothes hung to dry in a crooked alley. A kettle whistled inside a nearby cottage. Wind chimes sang above a crooked door marked with a spiral. He turned a corner and stopped. There, in the center of the square, was a fountain, and seated on the stone edge was himself. Not a copy, not a mirror, just him, dressed differently, a little older, a book in his lap, pen in hand, the journal. He approached slowly, but the other version of him didn't look up. He only turned a page and smiled faintly, as though recalling something from long ago. And then, a quiet voice beside him. Not his own. He turned and saw an elderly woman standing just behind the fountain. Kind eyes, pale coat, a brooch shaped like the spiral he had followed from the start. She looked at him gently and said, "You remembered us. That's all we ever needed." He wanted to speak, but no words came. She stepped forward, placed something in his hand. A key, warm. She nodded once. Not farewell, not welcome, but recognition. Then turned and walked into the mist. He looked down at the key. It was the same from the well, but whole now, its handle engraved with a name. Lartin. He turned back to the fountain, but his other self was gone. Only the journal remained. He picked it up, opened to the last page, and saw a note written in his own hand. The village faded around him, not in fear, not in loss, but like something returning to its natural place, beneath memory, beneath sleep. He stood at the edge of the square, the journal closed in his hands. The mist had thinned, the air had stilled, and the fountain had gone quiet. He walked the path one final time, past the orchard, now bare, past the tower, its bell at rest. The forest opened slowly. Each tree felt older now, not haunted, but held, as though the hollow had folded itself back into the earth, knowing it had been remembered, if only by one. And that was enough. At the forest's edge, he saw it, the lantern, still burning, hung gently on a low branch where his journey had first begun. Its light was softer now, golden and quiet. No flame, just glow. He stood before it, letting the hush of the woods wrap around his shoulders. He reached up, touched the glass, and for the first time felt warmth. Not the heat of fire, but of something once lost, now returned. A breeze passed through the leaves. He exhaled, and the lantern, quietly, went out. He didn't need it anymore. The path would find others. It always had, and the hollow would wait, as it always did. He turned toward home, no longer searching, no longer alone, just still. And somewhere behind him, deep in the woods, the bell tower rang once. Not loud, not warning, just remembering. Thank you for listening to The Village That Vanished. If you've made it this far, I hope you feel safe, grounded, and gently at peace. Let me know where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever felt the quiet call of a place you couldn't name. Until next time, sleep well. You're safe now. Nila.